Hello guys, this is Periscopes36 and today's video is going to be an inbox review of this kit here, which is Dragon's fairly recent StuG.III Ausf.G with concrete armor and Zimmerit. Now this kit was very graciously sent to me by Gary Wayne Bradford. Super thank you. I will definitely build this up, and I will do since I've built like about a dozen Dragon StuGs by this point, I will do a full building video looking at some tips and tricks and going through just easy modifications and just things I think you should know if you're building a Dragon StuG.III. And I'll probably do that in the summer in a couple of months. But today's video is just going to be looking in the box here. I'll talk about what the kit's like and any modifications you might need to do to make it historically accurate if you're concerned, though I don't think there will be very, very many. So let's get into it. So to start off, the box art here, it's one of the newer styles, not by Ron Polstad anymore, but it's very nice. Shows the tank here. And essentially this kit is going to be 6633, I believe, which is the July 1944 production with Zimmerit. It's going to be basically that kit, but you've got DS tracks, a couple of additional photo etch parts for these tie downs in the front, and then you're also going to have some parts for the concrete armor. So the side of the box here shows a couple of the marking options. You have a typical tritonal camouflage, and then this one here, which is a captured US 1, obviously, and there's a photo of this which shows the tank exactly like this with these tie downs on it, so I'm pretty sure that's what they're basing this kit off of. And I'm probably going to go with that option there too, maybe see if I can find some US soldiers to put inside of it, because that'd be pretty cool. This side of the box and the opposite side just show the basically what's on the front of the box again. See on both sides there. And on this side, they actually show the kit itself with a couple of additional details here. You should have the actual folding here. You can see the DS tracks and all the photo etch you have. Then we also have a couple of close-ups of the Zimmerit and of some of the PE options they give you here, which are new parts for this kit. Spare track mount on the front, and some tie downs here. Also the concrete armor as well, which shows you the nice close-up of the texture they give you. On the back of the box, they actually show a lot of different things, which basically just sums up all the details in the kit. So you got a partial interior here, a pretty good interior. You have basically the entire fighting compartment minus the ammunition storage, and it's pretty good. If you leave the hatches open and put some figures in there, the interior they give you is definitely good enough. They give you some more close-ups here of just some details, all the tools, everything like that, some photo etch DS tracks for the actual tracks. Some people like these. I don't like them. I don't think they show sag nicely on Panzer IIIs and stuff like that. If it was a Sherman, I'd definitely like DS tracks, but I'm just going to replace them with some extra magic tracks I have from a previous kit. You have some photo etch for the events here, for the, I guess the stowage guard, whatever that is, on the back there. More photo etch under there. You always have that annoying piece of photo etch inside the cupola up here. I figured out how to get that in there, so I'll cover that in the video when I build this. Overall, just basically showing you some details. And also you get the steel return rollers, which is good. So the box is pretty stacked full of stuff because you get most of a StuG.III and then most of it again with Zimmerit. So lots of parts in here you won't end up actually using in the end. First of all, let's look at the instructions actually. So as you can see, all the blue stuff here is stuff we will not be using, which is a bunch of details like basically a lot of armored plates here for the actual front and everything like that, which are now replaced with Zimmerit pieces. The roof of the Superstructure, because this is a late one, so it has the different roof with the machine gun mount and I guess extended bolts. At least they stick out of the roof. Photo etch fret here. Lots of other parts here. This bit's here and stuff like that's going to be the new Sprues with Zimmerit parts on them. DS tracks. And yeah, looks like about it. But as I was saying, lots of blue because a lot of the actual armored plates, things like, the engine deck, other bits like that, you're not actually going to end up using. I put a couple notes up here for myself, things that need to be corrected in the kit. Don't worry about that. The actual assembly is going to be, I guess, essentially just Dragon 6633. So you have a couple new parts here, like new drive sprockets with just a layer type here with the the exposed bolts, and basically there's no hubcap on it. These here, they show a different type of return roller than they give you, but the part number is accurate. So it doesn't look like this. That's a different type of steel return roller, but just that's right. So just ignore what it looks like and just use the part number. They also give you some new final drives here, which are just, once again, later Alcad vehicles. They have you cutting off a couple of little extended nubs here, you can see right there and there. That's because the part that is there should not be there on this late of a StuG.III, so that's good. Just slice that off, don't worry about it. Over here we move on with the assembly of just lower hull, putting on all the wheels and stuff like that. They're still showing those return rollers as the MEAG type. Should be Alcat. Don't worry about it. Just looks a little bit weird, so it might be a little confusing to some people. And moving along here, usual putting on the tools and stuff like that. If anybody has any idea whether or not this piece, like which option they give you, essentially there's two options here. They always give you this in every single tank, and I have no idea what the problem, what the thing is about it. Sorry for the pain on my hands too, by the way. There's one of these that is smooth, and one of these that has a tread pattern texture to mimic the tread pattern texture on the actual fenders themselves. So I'm never sure if I'm supposed to use the flat one or the tread pattern one here. I have no idea to this day. I always just go with the flat one, but maybe someday I'll figure out what the difference is and why they give you one of each. Also, don't forget to put on little bits like this guy over here, and the equivalent over here on the end there. They just help to hold the fender on. Sometimes I often forgot those on my earlier StuG builds because these steps are so cluttered. It's kind of easy to lose track of which parts you're supposed to be putting on. A couple things to note here. I want to point out. They show you putting on this type of rear light, which is a square style. That's incorrect. That would be a vehicle produced like about 2 years before this tank. So in the kit somewhere there'll be one of these that is different. It's tubular and has a clear part. I'll point it out later when I go through the actual parts in the kit. But you should probably try to use the other type of rear light here because this one is inaccurate. Also, they give you options here for the location of the fire extinguisher. They have basically angled upwards into the engine deck, because the engine deck is basically kind of like here, facing backwards. The rear of the tank is here. So they have one basically facing into the rear corner of the tank, one facing out of the rear corner of the tank, and one close and parallel. You want to use this one. So this is an Alcat tank, this is a MEAG tank, and this is a very, very late production tank. So just go with this one, because this tank is Alcat, given that the steel return rollers they give you and the Zimmerit they give you, it should be like that. So go with this guy here. Also, they show you putting on a couple of the mounts here for the side skirts, but only on the fenders. They don't tell you to put them on the Superstructure. That's just to mimic the actual tank with the US markings that I was kind of talking about earlier. It just has them only on the side for some reason. I have no idea why. They probably just removed them from the top. Also here you can actually see the tread pattern on that thing. So they're showing you, they're giving you an option, but they're showing you putting on the tread pattern one. I have no idea which one you're supposed to use. Also the tow cables going here. These are pretty tricky to get lined up right, but they should be fine. The way I do it usually is I just kind of super glue it and just kind of clamp it, let it dry for an hour, and then just kind of slowly work in like sections about 1 centimeter long, slowly gluing it along, wrapping it around, and gluing it and clamping it and letting it dry. And then I just loop it back in the other end. Also to note, they show the S-hooks on there. Ignore that, because they don't. There's basically this S-hook tool mount there. There shouldn't be that, but in the kit they actually tell you to put on the C-hooks right here. So this is typical Dragon being sloppy, leaving on things that shouldn't be there. For example, the S-hooks there, and previously just showing you the wrong return rollers because they're just recycling old instructions that are incorrect for the kit. Another thing to note on this page is that they tell you to slice off some bolts here on this panel, which first of all is covered in Zimmerit, so cutting off bolts and re-scrapping Zimmerit pattern is not going to be very, very fun. You don't need to do this actually, because they actually kept using plates with these bolts up until essentially when this vehicle would have been built, which is a July 1944 vehicle. So you can keep those bolts on there, you're fine, though you can also remove them because they started doing this in like May 44, I think. So you can do this if you want. I wouldn't, because I don't want to rescribe that Zimmerit pattern, so I would recommend you just leave the bolts on there and you're good. Vehicle is still accurate. Alright, next page here we look at attaching all the bits here for the cupola. This looks good. These guys I leave them out usually because I paint them black and stick them in afterwards because they should be black, not the base color of the tank, and that also makes it easier to paint in the clear aperture parts there. This photo etch ring is really hard to get in there, but I figured it out. You kind of have to roll it up a little bit around like maybe your hobby knife or something like that. Get it into a nice rolled up pattern, but make it still a little bit too wide for that. And you can kind of just wedge it in there, and since it's springy, it'll basically pop out and try to just fill the gap. You don't have to put the periscopes in here, you can leave the hatch closed. One thing I want to note also is that they tell you to put on here, this little guy here, G16. G16 here is a little basically like a bump stop that goes in there and holds the hatch closed. Well, here they show it vertically, but you can kind of see it's that little thing sticking out right there. It would hold the hatch about 45 degrees. That should be not there. They had a little tiny wooden ring that basically just made sure that the hatch was flat. So that's another thing you should do if you're building this tank. To make it accurate, what I would do is I would take the G16 part here and just kind of slice off the angled part and most of the little round bit there, leaving a little ring of the rounded section there, and I would glue it on, and that would give you something that looks as accurate as you're going to need, because that bump stop was deleted before this tank would have been built. Over here on the rear of the superstructure, they have you putting on the spare armor, or the spare track bracket here. They give you options of putting on these little guys here, which are wing nuts. I think they also did that earlier on, I forgot to point out, but for the tow cable mounts. Right over here is for the tow cable mounts. You can see that they tell you to slice off the little nub that's molded on there and put on the wing nut. It's very, very easy to do that. So if you can deal with parts that small, I'd recommend you do this. So some more details going on here. These are going to be mostly new parts because the superstructure itself is going to have Zimmerit on it. So most of the front armor pieces over here are all going to have Zimmerit, as well as this piece here, which is a new part, because this should be flat with no bolts on it. Though it doesn't matter because the concrete armor they give you covers that up, so whatever. Another thing I want to point out is they tell you, when they're mounting the roof here, they tell you use part P1 here to cover up the hole for the close defense weapon. You should not do that. I think that's a MEAG thing. Instead, there should be a similar part on the same sprue that actually goes underneath and plugs that little round hole from below. I'm getting into lots of weird StuG details here, but I just want to kind of go into some details about things that should be corrected for this kit. So I don't think you should be using that. You should be using the plug from below, because this is a MEAG detail. MEAG is one of the factories that build StuGs. Also, when you put on this deflector here in front of the cupola, there should be some weld seams around where it mounts to the roof, and there aren't molded on the kit obviously, so you can kind of go ahead and add that yourself if you want. Last steps over here on this page are assembling the radios to go in the sides of the superstructure. I would recommend that you leave parts D21 and D13, I guess. These little guys here off. These little, they're like basically like a bolted bracket that kind of glues onto the edge of these two parts here, sticking out at 90 degrees. Leave them off, because if you leave them off, you can actually, if you put them on, once you get the superstructure on, you can't take it off. But if you leave them off, you can easily get the superstructure on and off, because then otherwise it interferes with the fenders. So leave them off until you're all set, and then glue them on at the very, very end of the assembly. They're very easy to get into place. Just, that's another tip of mine. Leave these guys off if you can. Also, barrel cleaning rod here and spare tires. Make sure you make 2 of these guys. Alright, we're making good progress through the instructions. We haven't even looked at the kit yet, but whatever. Alright, so now we're working on the engine deck here. First of all, you're going to have to put on all the individual hinges because they're on a separate sprue. Because the side mold engine deck, they had to leave them separate, obviously. So you just got a bunch of these guys, G40. At least in this kit, they tell you to put them on. Some kits, they completely forget to tell you to put these hinges on. So they go on there. You also have to put on G.III, which is a little hook for the crane if they want to remove the engine deck. Another thing I want to point out is for the engine deck hatches here, they should not be Zimmerit. So that's going to be parts P20 and part P21, because they applied Zimmerit on top of the panels here and to the entire engine deck, but they did not put Zimmerit on the panels, except for half of this panel, because you can see, this budget probably shows it better. You can see this panel here, which is this guy up here, only has one of these elevated panels, when this hatch over here has 2. And they put Zimmerit obviously on top of the elevated panels. But on this half of the hatch that's exposed, because it doesn't have a panel there like this one, there was Zimmerit. So when I did this in the last kit I built, what I did was I used the kit part here, which is part P20, I guess. I cut it in half, and then because I used the Zimmerit half, and then I used the actual unzimmerited part to give you in the kit for this section here. So I have the unzimmerited section underneath the panel there, and then I use the zimmerited half because I cut part P20 in half, and I basically reassembled the hatch in 2 halves to get Zimmerit on one half and not Zimmerit on the other. There's another tip to you guys out there. Also, these little hatches here as well should not have Zimmerit, like these guys here. Here they show you putting on all the engine deck components. This is probably all accurate and fine. You can put in some spare track pins if you desire into the tools here, into the wheels here, because they often just had spare track pins to go with the spare tracks. They would often mount on the rear of the superstructure. You also have to put on the this little mount here. It's kind of like a thing for the Panzer Grenadiers to hold on to, or the crew to put stowage up against. Basically, it's a little rail around the engine deck. It's a bunch of little foot wedge parts. Not that hard to get together, actually. You just have to bend a couple of 9 degrees and glue them all together. Looks pretty good, and it kind of goes on at the end there. I would recommend you go with that option. It is accurate. Vehicles this late would have had that installed at the factory. So over here we're looking at assembling the front of the superstructure, or I guess the hull basically. And then you're going on, this is all new Zimmerit parts here except for part G22. I often leave off these G29 parts here because they're underneath the hatches and you can't see them. And then for the front light here, they tell you to actually, if you want, slice off the part that mounts into the actual no-tech light. So you just have basically the mount here and about half of the, I guess, the peg between the actual mount and the light itself. This is another thing they tell you to do as an option if you want to mimic that US captured vehicle, because if you look at the photos of it, it has the no-tech light missing from about there down. So I'm going to go with this because I want to do that US vehicle. If you're doing a normal tank, just make this light normal if you want. Alright, now we're looking at the assembly of the interior components. So we have half of the gun breech over here, which has some wheels in the seat for the gunner. This over here is the actual gun breech itself. This is the mount for it and the floor and the rear of the superstructure over here. And then also have a seat for the commander. Assembly of the gun here. The gun is one piece and slide molded, very, very nice. Only a little bit of like a molding seam on there, but not actually like a gap if it was two halves to go together. So it's very, very good. This all goes together fine. There should be no mislabelings here because it's the same on every single kit, so don't worry about that. And then they tell you to put that half of the gun breech here, half of the mount for it there, along with the other half, and the gun breech, stick it on there. And it's kind of a little bit tricky. I would not glue it. I would not glue the gun breech to this because it gets a little bit tricky. Or you could, and then leave the superstructure separate, but it's kind of a little bit finicky to have all these components kind of glued together, but removable for painting. So I'd recommend that you probably leave off the gun breech. Just don't glue it on, it'll sit on there fine. And then I tell you to put on the final components here, which is something I would not do. If I were building the kit when I get to this point in the instructions, I would have already put on the fenders, the front of the and the rear of the hull. And then what I would do, because when I finish the front, the rear, and the fenders, I will glue them onto the lower hull tub. Then I would put this in at the very, very end, and the superstructure on top of it. Because trying to glue these together and then fit them to the hull is just asking for fit issues. And the very last page here shows you putting on the DS tracks, which is fine. Actually, they've corrected it, and they're showing finally the correct return rollers here with little holes on them. So I guess they've finally corrected that. They also show you putting on the that spare track bracket on the front there, which is good. And the little guys, they give you these, like I guess they're foliage or something like that, mounts on the front. A couple of them along the front there, nothing too special. As well as the gun travel lock, which is going on here, along with the little foot wedge chain for it. This is a little bit fiddly to get right. I would probably replace that foot wedge chain with a real small chain because it looks kind of flat, because it's a very thin foot wedge part in real life. Also, they have you putting on the concrete armor components here, as you can see. And they show you cutting off like something. I don't even know what they're talking about. They just say remove maybe just the weld, or just maybe flush down the kind of like the corner of this plate here. It's a little bit uncertain what they mean. But yeah, then they put on the concrete parts here, which are these big guys that go on either side of the front. So that guy goes on there, and the other one goes on there, which covers out basically the entire Zimmerit texture, all these parts you put in the front. But whatever, you can. I mean, it's kind of an option. You don't have to put on this stuff if you want. If you don't want to, you can just build the kit without the concrete armor, and it will be fine. All right, now that we've looked at the instructions, let's look at some of the markings they give you. So you have a Das Reich StuG.III in March or France 1944, which is with a tri-tunnel camouflage and some crosses. Nothing too special. That's basically just what the box art is. Here's the US one that's captured. It's olive drab all over. It's just a green one with some stars painted on it. I probably want to go with this one because it's kind of cool. And they also give you this one here, which is another tritonal camouflage. Like it's the same as the camouflage. They actually have one here. It's like the same between the two, but whatever. And they have, instead of crosses on the side, they have 12 on the side and a cross on the rear. So essentially just the two tritonal camouflages with different markings, and then you get the US one. But I mean, you can find StuG.3s with basically any camouflage on them. There's so many of them, so you have tons of options out there. Alright, now before we get to the sprues, a couple things I want to point out. First of all, Dragon has kind of, they used to be really good about putting only about 1 or 2 sprues in a bag. This one has, I think, 4 sprues in this bag. This one here probably has about 5. And then, I mean, they're kind of just jamming as many sprues into a bag as they can. So that's kind of maybe asking for more parts to jostle around and get damage on the sprues. I don't think anything's like that in my kit, so it should be fine. Also, I want to point out that the DS tracks are stored in the kit, kind of like this, so they got a bend in them here. And they don't also have the cardboard sleeve. When they initially did DS, they gave these cardboard sleeves so they wouldn't get damaged. But now they haven't done that. And sometimes you can end up with the guide horns being a little bit bent, but they're actually pretty good on mine. So as much as I dislike DS tracks for the lack of sag that they give you, they do have nice detail on them. They're much better than the rubber band tracks you get on like old Tamiya kits, but I just think that they don't do German armored justice because they don't really do the sagging very well. But like I was saying earlier, on a Sherman, where you don't have to worry about sag, they look really good. And they're much easier to put together than a whole bunch of individual links. They also give you this, which is kind of like that photo etch and everything else in a big bag here. They used to actually give you a nice Dragon card, but this is just kind of what Dragon is today. So we have the tool cable in here, which is very stiff metal. If you've built any Dragon kits before, you know that this stuff is very stiff and hard to get to sit into place. I'm sure you can probably get some aftermarket stuff that's made of like a copper or something that's a little bit more flexible. You also have the decals in here, which are cartograph decals. Let me open this up. And the cartograph decals are always really good. I've actually put them on over a matte coat before and haven't even got silvering, so as you can see we have the crosses there, the number 12 for that one marking option, and then you can hopefully see we have some nice big US stars there for that captured US one, which I want to do because it looks pretty cool. And I've got the photos of it so I can weather it nicely. As for the photo etch, we have this guy here, which is just parts for that kind of railing thing around the rear of the superstructure, like the rear of the engine deck, I guess. And then you also have the chain in there for the gun travel lock at the front. So just a bunch of parts in here to fold. I mean, it's good quality photo etch. Dragon always has good quality photo etch. And you can see that you have little kind of slots cut out in the parts there to help you know exactly where to glue the other guys kind of in there, so it lines up nicely as well. Because that's going to go like that, and you're going to have these kind of ribs sticking down. So they give you little points to line it up nicely. I do like that. And here is the kind of standard Panzer III photo etch. So you got like the vent under the engine deck here, these guys on top of the engine deck. As you can see up here, we have these 2 straight guys here with no texture, and then these 2 guys here with the tread pattern. I was talking about that earlier, about not knowing which one goes, or which one to use. I still have no idea. They give you some little, oh, that's what these are. These little things right here, you can see these little tiny guys. Those are the tie downs. They want you to round them off. They give you little strips. You can see there's little tiny strips in there. They want you to cut them off and make them round, which can be a little bit tricky. Don't worry about these 4 little triangles. Those are for MEAG vehicles. They're going to need to use a couple of these guys. And these little semicircles here are for the inside of the idler wheels. They used to give you a big round piece. Now it's, I think, 3 kind of sections of a round piece per wheel, so you end up with 12 total, I guess. And it's just a little bit more work. Not really a problem, just more work to do, and it's just kind of like a typical Dragon kind of cutting cost thing today. Whatever, it's fine. Alright, we can finally get to some plastic. Sorry it's been taking so long, but I do want to cover this kit in as much detail as I can because I know lots about StuGs, and I just want to let people know how to, kind of what my thoughts are about the kit. That's kind of why I was sent the kit, because I could do a decent review of it. So first of all, we have the lower halt up here, which is the newer ones with Zimmerit molded on. And the Zimmerit does look very, very good. You can see it's just kind of in the middle there, which is accurate actually. They didn't cover the whole thing, I guess. There's none on the rear. I guess there isn't, but one thing to note is that when you put the rear plates on here, kind of like a rear plate that goes on there and stuff like that, there really should be Zimmerit on those panels, but there isn't in the kit. You can add Zimmerit if you want, but I mean it's kind of tricky. I'm probably just going to get some mud on there, which will add enough textures and that you can't really notice the lack of Zimmerit. But overall, very good. You can see we have little pegs here to help line up the swing arms for the suspension. So these are very nice. Oh, and also cut off all these little pegs here. Cut these guys off. They're just part of the molding process. They're not used. All 6 of them, get rid of them. We also have 2 new parts in the kit here, which are the concrete armor components, and they actually look kind of cool. I've never kind of thought about building a concrete armor StuG before, but I am going to with this one because I want to make that cool US tank. And as you can see, there is some texture on there. It actually looks good, which is kind of surprising for a new Dragon piece, because often Dragon parts that are new are kind of cheaply done because they're just trying to add a gimmick to a pre-existing kit. But this is actually well done, so I do like this. The other piece is basically the same, but it does look good. A little bit of almost like a flash on the outside there, but I think that might just be to help you line it up on the tank, because this is concrete. It's applied quite messily, so when you put this on the tank, you might want to get some extra thin on there and kind of make sure that there's no gap, make it look like it's kind of just been like plowed on basically with like a trowel or something like that. We also have the clear parts in this little baggie here with the lower hull and the concrete bits. You have, I guess, 7 vision blocks here. Oops, 7 vision blocks for the cupola. This guy here for the front of the superstructure for the driver. This is the gun sight here. This is part of that rear light that you should use, because the kit, the rear light that they tell you to use is a very early one, and it's incorrect. So you're going to want to use this guy. This thing here, I have no idea what that is, honestly. And these here are periscopes for a StuG.III, because a StuG.III uses the same thing, just it has a driver's periscope set up, so don't worry about these guys. I'm honestly not sure what that thing is. I've actually never figured it out. It might be for the StuG.IV, I completely forget. Whatever, it's probably not important. So this sprue here contains most of the lower hull components and suspensions. So we have swing arms here, mounts for the rear of the hull. You will not be using this part, you'll be using the Zimmerit option for this guy over here. But you've got the exhausts, shock absorbers, and things like that. Also the this over here is the armor for the commander's cupola that you should add weld seam to. One thing I want to note is that in the kit, a couple things you might want to do is the exhausts are not quite accurate. A later type of StuG.III like this would have almost like scallops, rounded shapes cut out of the bottom there, because they were putting in mounts for a new type of rear towing pintle. So the exhausts are not quite accurate. I might not even do this, because once you put on things like the rear deflector, like this guy here, it actually covers your view of the exhausts like 99%, so you can barely even see the exhausts. But yeah, the exhausts are not quite accurate. I mean, modifying them wouldn't be too hard. They're kind of hollow though, so it might pose some issues. For the rear of the lower hull here, these are the 2 pegs that I tell you to cut off, because there is a part that goes on there which is actually like this guy here, but that's earlier, so good on them for actually telling you not to put that on there. Another thing you might want to do though is a little second round, this big round thing here, that's good, but this little second round thing here, which is the coolant access hatch, was deleted in about like late 44, so get rid of that. Just it's a raise right now, just sand it flush and you're good. The actual level detail and everything though looks really good. I always like to see that they actually have these like little warning arrows molded onto the exhaust there, which are accurate. And overall, it does look good. There might be a little bit of a seam line on here, but actually not that bad. I'm usually worried about when you get things like this, like little textures like that on the idler mount there. When you get a seam line, it kind of messes it up, but it's actually pretty good in this kit, so not a problem there. and the weld seams they give you and everything like that. Always looks really, really good. You can say what you want about Dragon kind of being cheap and giving you poor instructions, but the actual molding on their kits is always beautiful. Next up, we got a couple of new parts. We have basically two of these, so we'll just get rid of one of them, and also this guy here. So the two of these things you get are basically new parts for these later steel return rollers, which are accurate. This is good. I like to see that because they're kind of cool. This is a new final drive with some bolts to go on. I'm not sure if they're bolts or like oil or like some kind of access port. They show the instructions. They kind of just go like along the end there where these go. They tell you actually a pretty good job where they go. You also end up with a new part here for the end of the drive sprocket there that has just a different style without the actual hubcap on there, so you can see the bolts are exposed. Also have a couple new parts over here. This is kind of cool. This is the actually I believe that this is that. Was that the towing pencil? I completely forget. What is this? I honestly am not exactly sure what this little section over here is all about, but I'm pretty sure that this is that later type of towing pintle that they were it would not be used in this tank. It'd be used in a later one. But that's kind of cool. I'm not exactly sure what that's all about, which is kind of weird. But they give you a couple of the parts here, like you end up with a couple of parts here for the gun travel lock and a new front armor piece here. Without Zimmerit, but this is correct for a later vehicle like this. They would not have the bolts on that piece. Next up, I got two of these sprues here, so I'm just going to get rid of one of them again. And these are all the wheels. So you have 6 wheels over here, which are the ends of them. Over here you have the back half of the wheels because it's the doubled up sets of wheels. Over here we have the actual, I guess these are the torsion bar system through the actual hull. You end up with the drive sprockets over here. You'll use this, but you'll not use this part here because remember you got the replacement parts they give you to be accurate for a later tank. You also won't use this because once again they give you special parts there, and you'll have photo etch rings to go inside the idler wheels here. Also note these are the track pins they give you over here, optional track pins to go in the spare tire mounts, which are over here. These are the actual spare tires, the ends there, and the mounts. You also have the return rollers here, which are rubber. You won't use these. You'll use the steel ones that I showed you earlier. You also won't use these guys here, but you'll use this as part of the idler wheel, and you'll also use this because it's the C-hook, which is a tool that's on a later tank like that. Also to note that over here are all the little wing nuts they give you that you can put on optionally on parts like the I guess the tow cable mounts and the like a couple of tools, stuff like that. Overall, very good quality molding on there. As you can see, they actually have molded on the word Continental, though they actually have a U at the end instead of an L, because for licensing reasons they can't put Continental, but you can just slice off the end of the U actually and make it an L, so that's a good tip right there. There's a little bit of a seam line on the wheels, but nothing that's kind of out of the ordinary for a plastic armor kit like this. We also have this sprue here, which is a new sprue because it has the Zimmerit on it. So we've got hatches here for the engine deck. Remember, you won't use these guys because they're Zimmerited and the engine deck hatches were not Zimmerited. So you won't use those two, and you won't use these two. But remember, you'll use this, the half I'm not covering with my thumb. You want to use that. Cut it off, and then use the equivalent half of this, of the non-Zimmerited one they give you, to make your own half Zimmerited hatch there. Then you've got these guys here, which are the elevated panels that go on top of there. Some with holes for the spare tire mounts. You have some parts over here for the Superstructure that aren't, I mean, these ones aren't really an issue because they actually are covered by the concrete armor in the end, but whatever. Some front hatches over here, front of the hull. More, I guess it's the bow plate there, rear of the hull. Remember, you don't need to cut off the little bolts here. You don't need to worry about that. You also have some ventilator vent sides, whatever, over here as well. Dragon always does a beautiful job with their Zimmerit here. It looks great. You can see almost like some damage going on up here in this guy. Looks nice. Also, you note that you won't use this piece here because you'll use the solid piece that they give you for a later war tank. But then, of course, it's covered with Zimmerit, it's covered with concrete, so it's not a problem anyways. It does look beautiful though. So with a pin wash, that'll really stand out on the end of the finished model. Next up, we got a weird little sprue here. Over here we have the mount for the rum drum foyer, whatever it is, the machine gun that goes right there. This is actually the mount for it. The machine gun is probably somewhere else. I don't know where the machine gun is. I'll look for it later, but this is the mount for it here with the shield and stuff like that. And then here we have a proper late type superstructure roof. As you can see, it has the exposed bolts that are not flush, they're sticking out, which is good. This here is the machine gun mount. You also have the little pills and holes, which are nice. That's what these little 3 holes there are for. They give you some special hatches here because this has hatches that open side to side instead of front to back. So you need new hatches, and also the lock is moved on the inside. So they give you also some hatches on another sprue. Don't use those because they won't be correct. Use these guys here. They also have a couple parts here. Now, that hole there is for the close defense weapon, which is like a grenade launcher that fires through the roof that was used on very, very late vehicles, like very late 44 vehicles. This is like a mid 44 vehicle. So they give you, I believe that's what these 3, or these 2 guys here are. Yeah, I think so. These 2 little round things here are plugs for it. And this one here, with the 4 bolts that goes on the top, I believe that is a MEAG thing. Alcat did it from below, so I would just, I'm not sure if this piece here is to replace that, or if that's to actually cover up this if you don't want to mount the machine gun on it. It's a little bit unclear. They don't tell you anything like this, and I don't have very much experience with this kit itself. But what I would do is I would use part 1 here, P1, and I would just glue it underneath down there, covering up that hole, because it should be covered from below for an Alcat vehicle. Alrighty, next up we have some more fenders here, which I guess, well, there's more fenders because we have a whole bunch of sets of fenders, but we will not be using these fenders because these are Panzer III fenders for a conversion vehicle. So ignore the fenders here, we won't be using them. Also ignore these parts here, and these parts here, and that part, and that part, and that part, and that part, and this part, and basically everything on this sprue you're not going to use except for these guys here, which go underneath the engine vent parts there. You also have a couple of lengths of bolts here, right there and right there, which are the things that go, if you remember, underneath the superstructure parts where the radios go. I remember I told you to leave those off until the end, otherwise they'll make it harder to get the superstructure on. And most of these parts here are replaced with Zimmerit parts, like this guy and all these things here, so don't worry about this too much. But actually, remember, you want to use the hatches, because remember, they didn't use Zimmerit hatches, so you use these guys here, and this guy, and the half with the hole of that one, because, like I've said probably 4 times already, you want to use half of this hatch with Zimmerit, and then this half over here without Zimmerit. So cut them in half and use half of each, and you'll end up with a half Zimmerit, half not Zimmerited hatch. Now over here we have another sprue with more fenders that we will not be using, because these are normal StuG.III fenders, but they are early ones, so you won't be using these either. But you will be using the cupola components on here, and these guys here that go inside the superstructure itself. Don't use this roof because this is a later, an earlier roof. As you can see, there's no machine gun mount there, and a couple other things are different. Overall, just like, a typical sprue here that you're only going to use a couple of components of. Also, one thing I want to point out is that this piece here is a kind of like a front of the superstructure that goes along the front of the superstructure here, between that and the superstructure itself. It goes, you can kind of see the gaps for it there. It goes across the top of the superstructure here. Do not glue it to the superstructure, because if you do, you'll not be able to get the gun inside, which is a big problem. So glue it to the roof instead, because the roof, remember, you're using the other roof, you're not using this roof, but I'm using it as an example. They go like this. Take that part over here, this guy right here, and glue it along the edge to the roof itself, and then leave the roof removable, because when you do that, it'll be stuck on there, and it won't be covering the top of this archway here, and then you'll be able to get the gun in. That's a very, very important tip for StuG.IIIs, because if you don't, you're going to have a hell of a time getting the gun breech in there and the gun barrel and everything like that. It's going to be impossible. And while we have the superstructure out here, we might as well just look at it. Once again, more beautiful Zimmerit all over it. You have all these things on the inside there, and they're kind of just, most of them you can't actually see because they're against the roof edge, But a couple of them, like maybe this guy here and this one there, you might see from the hatches. So most of them aren't a problem, but they're kind of just annoying because it's more cleanup for you. But overall, a beautiful Zimmer detail. Looks really good, and I'm surprised they don't actually have more molding points on it, given it's side molded. Though you have to put on more Zimmerit components on the side here actually, and also on the front as well. But looks really, really good. This sprue here contains most of the interior components. So you have the floor of the superstructure, the back wall, bits of the gun breech, part of the manlet over here, a couple of stowage bins that I believe are for like a Panzer, like a StuG.III Ausf.A, very, very early production, which is weird. Like, why are they still on here? They should get rid of those. That's a little bit odd. Maybe because they re-released the Michael Whitman Ausf.A. They might have retooled this sprue to have those on there, and they might have just actually put it in here. So that's weird, but whatever. You also have radios here, and just various components for the interior, like binoculars and things like that. The actual radios themselves are always very nicely molded here. You can see all the little details on them. Looks really impressive. And as for the floor itself, really nice tread pattern. Also to note, if you're painting the interior, the whole thing will be basically that ivory white color, except for the floor, which should be a primer red. And then a couple of details like the gun breech and things like that will be like a grayish green color, I think. When I do build this tank, I'll go into all the details about painting the interior properly, because it's kind of confusing, I guess, all the colors to use. But overall, this sprue looks really good. Alrighty, we've opened up the last bag, and we have a couple more sprues here. This is both sprues that are named F, which is weird because you have F here, which is more interior components, part of the gun breech here, the gun barrel itself. Here's the MG34 you'll use for the mount on the roof, and more breech parts here, and the muzzle brake over there, and the other half of that cast and blended mantlet. So they give you the actual end of it and the gun sleeve on the previous sprue for the interior. As you can see, gun barrel is one piece, slide molded, and you only have basically one exposed attachment point there, because this one is actually inside the gun sleeve, and the seam on that thing is basically like negligible. So always like to see a side molded barrel, because I hate cleaning up seams. That's always good. Now this half of the sprue has the mantlet that we will use in the kit, which is the Tough Blende mantlet, the cast one. And then we have various mounts for the side skirts. So we have early side skirt rails here, and later ones right here, which have the telltale triangle mounts instead of the little pegs that these guys have. So you'll use these guys here. You also use this and that. You won't use these because these are for the earlier ones, but you'll use these mounts here, those there, and stuff like that. The seam lines on these guys here are always a pain to clean up, especially on the inside, because there's like a seam down in there. Just a pain in the ass, but whatever. Overall though, these parts are quite finely molded, given that they're in real life they're very, very thin sheet metal, and this is molded in plastic, so this is about as fine as you can get for plastic. Looks really good. And also the mantlet here does have a nice cast texture on it. It's pretty faint, but I can attest to the fact that when you paint this thing, you will be able to see the cast texture in the end. Alrighty, now 2 more sprues to go, and this one here is one of them. So we have, this is a late StuG.III component sprue. So we have a late bow plate here. Don't use this because they give you a Zimmerit option. You also have some late hatches here, which I don't think they use because they gave you these again on the sprue with the Superstructure roof, so don't worry about them. We will be using these fenders though. These are the late proper ones with the proper fender support arms over here. You also have a hull front we won't be using because we have a Zimmerit one in the kit, though you'll probably end up using these front parts here for the these go on the side of the front of the hull behind the final drives, and they're just like a tote mount. And over here we also have Zimmerited engine deck and Zimmerited rear panel, but this one is interesting because this one actually does not have those bolts that tell you to cut off the sprues. Sorry, not cut off the sprues, but cut off the previous one, because remember they tell you to remove some of the bolts on it, you could just use this guy. Or you could just go with the one with the bolts, because remember, both are accurate for this time period because it was a transition period between these two styles. So it's kind of weird how they tell you to use the kit part and make it modified to be this part, even though, well, first of all, they give this to you in the kit, and also both are accurate. Just kind of like typical stupid Dragon stuff, but whatever. Nice texture on there. Looks good. Zimmerit on these kits is always beautiful. And you can see that that's where those little mounts for the hinges are going to go on there. But the interlocks are beautiful on there. The welds are always really nice on here. Now looking at the fenders over here, they have a nice tread pattern on them. One thing to point out though is that there should be Zimmerit on here and here, and I believe on the backs as well. So that's a little bit of a kind of a downside, though I doubt Dragon would do something as, you know, expensive as retooling some fenders with Zimmerit, so whatever. You can do that yourself, or you can just ignore it. I don't really care. I'll probably do it if I can find a Zimmerit tool. But nice texture on there, and they have all these points on here molded for the tool locations, and they should be accurate. You shouldn't have to fill any of them because these are already late fenders, so all the tool changes would have already happened by then. There aren't any options, so there shouldn't be any misplaced holes here. And over here we also have the Fender Supports here, which kind of go, I guess, kind of in there and stuff like that. The front as well. If you notice, the difference between these and the earlier Fenders is that they actually have parts of the Fender Supports molded on there because they are a different type of Fender Support. Another thing I want to point out that I missed earlier is that there is a toolbox that goes on here. You should put Zimmerit on the top of it as well, in the same way you should put Zimmerit on the ends of the fenders. They don't give you a Zimmerited toolbox cover in the kit, but I mean, there should be Zimmerit over the top of the toolbox here. So once again, if you're worried about historical accuracy, you could go ahead and add some Zimmerit on the top of the toolbox that goes right on there. This is the toolbox right here, and this is on one of the earlier sprues we're looking at that has things like the StuG.III fenders that we won't be using, as well as all these mounts here for the underneath side of the engine, whatever these little panels are that go on there. So I forgot to point that out, sorry, but that's where the toolbox is, and that should have Zimmerit on it. Alrighty, last sprue here. We have basically just tools on this side, and then a couple more tools over here. And here are the little, these are the little hinges that go on the engine deck. Smoke launchers, don't use those. A couple of the parts here that are just kind of don't be used and things like that. These are all just basically tools and accessories, small details for the superstructure and the fenders. And as usual, really nice detail on them. The actual latches themselves, I'm sure Adam Man will love me when I go into detail about this. They look good. The latches are a little bit thick. I usually try to sand these down a little bit just from the outside edges, just kind of make sure that these little handles there are a little bit more fine, but they look good anyways. Over here we have tons of shovels and axes. The ones that they tell you to put on the kit are accurate, so don't worry about all the options they give you here. It's just because tons of different StuG.IIIs and Panther.IIIs had different locations of tool clamps and things like that. Over here are the little hinges. They're not too much of a pain because the actual attachment point is on the end of the hinge. So it's basically flush up against the actual, the inside of the hinge on the hatch itself. So that's not too bad. Grenade launchers over here, they give you loaded and unloaded options. Don't worry about that. This isn't like a Kursk StuG, so you won't have those. These are earlier Fender Supports. Remember, we won't be using those because we have our later ones on the other sprue. Spare track bracket on the rear here. Remember, you can actually cut off the little nubs there and put on the wing nuts on the earlier sprue with the wheels. And then lastly, over here we have a couple of details like tool cable eyelets, S-hooks, don't use those. And we got the rear lights here. So this guy here, let me show you. This is the one that I tell you to use in the kit right here. It's a very early style. You should use this guy. So what they tell you to use is this one along with the mount for it right here. But you should use this guy here, which is the clear one. And there's that clear part earlier on that kind of slots into it. You can kind of see where it goes in there. That's the proper later style of Panzer III, StuG.III rear light. And lastly here, we got the jack block itself, with a nice wooden texture on it. A little bit of flash there, which is odd, but Dragon kits like this one usually have very, very minimal flash. I haven't actually seen any flash, except for on this and the concrete parts, and it's been very, very minimal, and only a few parts actually have little seam lines on them, so always good. I do wish that they carried on the wood texture on the sides though, because it looks really good, but it's kind of blank there. And speaking of seam lines, let's check out the tow cable eyelets here. They look pretty good, not much of a seam line along the edge of them. So with that, we wrap up this review, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's basically been an hour. That's very, very long. I'm sorry about that, but I don't make these videos just to entertain you. I make them mainly to inform you. If you want to know what the kit's like, you just do a Google search, and then you come across this video and you figure what the kit's like, and I kind of want to go into as much depth as I could. I hope I did that. Yeah, so my overall thoughts on the kit are basically, it looks great. Nothing I would really change about it, apart from, of course, the accuracy things, which are like adding Zimmerit to the front and rear of the fenders, little angled portions there. I guess adding Zimmerit to the rear of the lower hull area, and adding Zimmerit to the top of the toolbox. I would change the location of the plug for the close defense weapon to internally rather than externally mounted. I would change the rear light, which you can do with parts in the kit. I would change the engine deck hatches to be not Zimmerited, which you can do with parts in the kit. And what else? Probably also the details on the rear of the lower hull, like the exhausts, which is a little bit tricky. Adding some pins, which is the mounting point for the late style of towing pin tool. That's really complicated. If you want to know about it, just look it up. I'm not going to be able to explain it well here. Also, cutting off the coolant access port on the rear of the hull. Oh right, you probably also want to add a weld seam around the shot deflector for the commander's cupola. But other than that, they actually managed to nail most of the historical accuracy things, like, you know, muzzle brake, all the tool locations, everything like that. Looks great. Essentially, it's just Dragon 6.6.3.3 with a couple of new parts. So I like that. It's a very good kit. I would recommend it, as long as DS tracks aren't really bothering for you. If they are, then just get Dragon 6.6.3.3. It's the same kit. You just get no concrete armor and basically side skirts instead, and the individual tracks. Yeah, so as always, thanks for watching very much, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you were curious about this kit, and a huge thanks to our patrons. We have, of course, Gary Wayne Bradford, who actually sent this kit up to me. Super thanks to you. And of course, we also have Philip Kruger, Harry Ainsworth, Ricky from Ryan's Paintings, Chris Corse, Ian Strustrick, Johnny Foxtrot, Richard Ward, John Butler, Sam Murphy, Jun Yi, Mika Nistrock, and of course, Rudolph Kiros. And also we have Dr. EO, who supports me through PayPal in a similar way. Huge thanks to you guys. It means a lot to me that you'll support me like this, and also send kits. It's really kind of you. I will probably bring you guys a couple of more kit reviews in the future, because I have a couple other kits, like a Dragon Panther with steel wheels, and a weird Cyber Hobby Martyr thingy. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next one. Bye-bye.